I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Today we're reading from the book of Joshua, chapter 16. So let's focus on verse 10. This was the inheritance of the tribe of the descendants of Ephraim, by their clans, together with the cities set apart for the descendants of Ephraim, within the inheritance of the descendants of Manasseh, all the cities with their villages. But they did not drive out the Canaanites who live in Gezer. So the Canaanites live in Ephraim to this day, but they are forced laborers. So today's passage is a continuation of a notion that Israel's deliverance into Canaan is also a metaphor for our deliverance through Jesus. And once the major enemies had been destroyed, the individual Israelite tribes were then given the task of driving out the rest of the land's inhabitants. Now, this is a metaphor for us because Jesus has conquered sin and death on the cross and has been resurrected, proving that he has defeated them. And now we are charged with the task of subduing our fleshly desires, that is, those former masters, our old sin self, that value system we used to follow. The Apostle Paul told the church at Philippi in Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good purpose." Paul wasn't telling the Philippians to work in order to earn their salvation. As he told the church in Ephesus in Ephesians 2, we are saved by grace through faith and not of our good works. So what was Paul saying? Well, Paul was saying that Christians must work hard once you've become a believer and you're filled with the Holy Spirit. Work hard to drive out that old self, those old value systems, in order to enjoy the fullness of your salvation. That is, inside of you, bundled in your salvation, is the Holy Spirit in fullness of life. So don't let those former inhabitants come back and raid you and start beating you up and stealing the joy of being a believer. We have been given fullness of life from God by His grace. But we must also fight. And if we do, God will go before us, even giving us the will to fight, because now the Holy Spirit is in us. And He is the one who gives us even the will to fight and to finish the job. Now, once again, Jesus has finished the atoning work, but now we must go out and start changing the way that we live now that we're saved and allowing ourselves to be governed by the Holy Spirit, literally driving those former inhabitants out of our land. And in the same way, Israel was delivered into Canaan by God's grace, but they would never enjoy the land until they removed the remaining insurgents. Now think of the U.S. military involvement in the Middle East in the early 2000s. While the U.S.-led coalition forces eliminated the terror groups in Iraq and Afghanistan and their ability to wage full-scale war, there would never be peace until every single terrorist insurgent is completely removed and the people have a new value system so that they don't go back to terrorism, either through their death or their complete surrender to the coalition forces. So the tribe of Ephraim puts a new twist on failure to dispossess. Consider how some of the Judean family tribes who believed that they couldn't drive out the Jebusites, well, what they did was they allowed some of the Jebusites to remain neighbors. And then Ephraim chose to make the remnant of Gezer slaves. Please don't rest until you have driven out all of the former inhabitants. Your former sinful ways will never work for you. They will only find ways to come back and raid you. So you don't do God's work by the ways of the devil. So don't rest until you've driven out all of the former inhabitants of your own land. You cannot be neighbors with your sin nature, nor can you make it your slave. It will not be mastered because its nature is to master you. So determine to kill that old self, the out of control flesh, and make it submit to the Holy Spirit who resides within you. Deny its advances whenever it resurfaces with a plan to negotiate you away from God's perfect design for your life. I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. You know, Groundworks Ministries exists because of gracious donations from people like you. And if you're not already donating to Groundworks Ministries, would you consider doing so today? Check us out at groundworksministries.com.